Marcus Williams walked down Main Street with his backpack heavy on his shoulders. The 16-year-old boy had just finished his job at Miller's bookstore. He loved working there after school. The smell of old books and the quiet corners made him feel safe. Marcus could not hear the world around him, but he could see everything clearly. The evening air was cool and fresh. Street lights were just starting to turn on as the sun went down. Marcus pulled his phone from his pocket to check the time. His mother would be worried if he came home too late. She worked long hours at her job in Washington, but she always made sure to call him every night. Marcus did not see the police car that had been following him for 2 blocks. Officer Jake Morrison sat behind the wheel, talking to his partner. Someone had called about a young man acting strange near the shopping area. The caller said the person looked suspicious and might be on drugs. Morrison was new to the police force. He had been a cop for only 8 months. His partner, Officer Rick Davis, had been doing this job for 12 years. Davis was tired after a long day of dealing with drunk drivers and domestic calls. "There he is," Morrison said, pointing at Marcus. "That matches the description we got." Davis looked at the teenager walking peacefully down the street. The boy did not look dangerous to him, but the radio call had said to check on anyone matching the description in this area. "Pull over," Davis told his partner. "Let's just talk to him and see what's going on." Morrison stopped the car about 20 feet behind Marcus. Both officers got out and started walking toward the teenager. Their heavy boots made loud sounds on the sidewalk, but Marcus could not hear them coming. "Hey, you there," Davis called out. "Stop and turn around." Marcus kept walking. He was thinking about the homework he needed to finish tonight. His math teacher had given the class a difficult assignment, and Marcus wanted to get it done early. "I said stop," Davis called louder. The officer started walking faster. Morrison followed behind him, his hand moving toward his radio. Marcus felt a vibration in his pocket. His phone was buzzing with a text message from his friend Tommy. He stopped walking and pulled out his phone to read the message. The bright screen lit up his face in the growing darkness. "He's got something in his hand," Morrison said quickly. His voice was tight with worry. "What is that?" Davis could not see clearly from where he was standing. The streetlight above them was broken, and shadows covered most of the sidewalk. All he could see was Marcus holding something that glowed in the dark. "Put your hands up," Davis shouted. "Drop whatever you're holding." Marcus read Tommy's message about their plans for the weekend. He smiled and started to type back a reply. His fingers moved quickly on the phone's keyboard. Morrison pulled out his radio and called for backup. His heart was beating fast. "We have a subject who won't follow orders," he said into the radio. "He's holding an unknown object and won't respond to commands." The dispatcher's voice came back through the radio. "Backup is on the way. Be careful out there." Marcus finished typing his message and put the phone back in his pocket. He started walking again, completely unaware that 2 police officers were 20 feet behind him. Thinking he was dangerous, Davis and Morrison looked at each other. They had been taught in training that people who don't follow police orders might be hiding something. Maybe they were on drugs or had weapons. The officers did not know that Marcus could not hear their commands. "We need to stop him before he gets away," Morrison said. He was young and eager to prove himself as a good cop. What if he's armed? Davis was not sure. Something felt wrong about this situation, but he could not put his finger on it. The teenager looked normal to him, but the radio call had been very specific about checking suspicious people in this area. Marcus reached into his backpack to get his house keys. He was almost home now. Just 2 more blocks and he would be safe in his warm kitchen, eating the dinner his neighbor, Mrs. Johnson, always left for him on nights when his mother worked late. "He's reaching for something," Morrison said loudly. His voice was full of panic. "Now, he's got a weapon." Davis squinted in the dim light. He could see Marcus moving, but he could not tell what the boy was doing. Fear started to build in his chest. What if this teenager really was dangerous? What if he hurt someone? The 2 officers started running toward Marcus. Their feet pounded on the concrete sidewalk. Morrison pulled out his gun and held it low by his side. Davis kept his weapon in its holder but put his hand on it. Marcus found his keys in his backpack and pulled them out. The metal keys caught the light from a nearby store window and reflected a bright flash. He held them up to see which key opened his front door. "Gun!" Morrison yelled. "He's got a gun." Davis saw the flash of metal in Marcus's hand. In the poor light and from far away, he could not tell what it was. His training kicked in. When someone might have a weapon, police officers are taught to act fast to protect themselves and others. "Drop it now!" Davis screamed at the top of his lungs. Marcus heard nothing. He was looking at his keys, trying to find the right one. His house key had a small blue cover on it that his mother had put there to help him identify it quickly. Both officers had their guns out now. They were 30 feet away from Marcus, but getting closer fast. Morrison's hands were shaking. He had never pointed his weapon at a real person before. "He's not dropping it," Morrison said. "What do we do?" Davis felt time slowing down. Everything that happened next would happen in just a few seconds, but it would feel much longer. This was the moment when a normal evening turned into something terrible. Marcus found his house key and smiled. He put his backpack on his shoulder and started to put the keys in his pocket. As he moved his arm, the keys caught the light again and flashed bright silver. Morrison saw the movement and the flash of metal. His finger was on the trigger of his gun. All his training told him that people with weapons were dangerous. His training told him to protect himself and his partner. "He's raising it up," Morrison shouted. Davis saw Marcus moving and made a decision that would change many lives forever. His fingers squeezed the trigger of his gun. The sound of gunshots filled the quiet street. Marcus Williams fell to the ground, his house keys scattered around him on the cold sidewalk. Elena Williams was sitting at her desk on the 4th floor of a government building in Washington, D.C. The room had no windows, and the only light came from her computer screen and a small lamp. She was reading reports about threats to national security when her personal phone rang. The phone showed a number she did not recognize. Elena almost ignored it because she was busy with important work. But something made her answer on the 4th ring. "Is this Elena Williams?" A woman's voice asked. "Yes, who is this?" Elena replied. She looked at the clock on her wall. It was almost 9 at night. "This is Dr. Sarah Martinez from City General Hospital. I'm calling about your son Marcus Williams. He's been brought to our emergency room with serious injuries." Elena's world stopped. The papers on her desk became meaningless. The computer screen blurred in front of her eyes. Her son was hurt. Her Marcus was in the hospital. "What happened?" Elena asked. Her voice was calm, but her hands were shaking. "There was an incident with police officers about an hour ago. Your son has been shot. He's in surgery right now. You need to come to the hospital as soon as possible." Elena hung up the phone and stared at the wall. For 15 years, she had worked for the Central Intelligence Agency. She had seen terrible things happen around the world. She had read reports about wars and violence and death. But none of that had prepared her for this moment. She grabbed her car keys and ran to the elevator. The building was almost empty at this time of night. Her footsteps echoed in the long hallways as she hurried to the parking garage during the drive to the hospital. Elena's mind was spinning. Marcus was a good boy. He worked hard in school and at his job. He never got in trouble. Why would police officers shoot him? What had happened on that street? Elena had spent her career learning how to stay calm in crisis situations. She knew how to think clearly when others panicked. But this was different. This was her child. She parked her car and ran into the emergency room. The bright lights hurt her eyes after the darkness of the drive. Nurses and doctors moved quickly through the hallways. The smell of disinfectant filled the air. "I'm looking for Marcus Williams," Elena told the woman at the front desk. "He's my son. He was brought in about an hour ago." The nurse looked at her computer screen. "He's still in surgery. Dr. Martinez will come talk to you as soon as she can. Please take a seat in the waiting room." Elena sat in a plastic chair that was uncomfortable and cold. Around her, other families waited for news about their loved ones. Some people were crying. Others stared at the television on the wall without really watching it. Time moved slowly. Elena looked at her phone every few minutes, but only 5 or 10 minutes had passed each time. She tried to read the messages from her work email, but the words did not make sense. Her mind could only think about Marcus. After what felt like hours, Dr. Martinez came into the waiting room. She was a small woman with kind eyes and tired-looking scrubs. Elena stood up quickly when she saw the doctor walking toward her. "Mrs. Williams, I'm Dr. Martinez. We spoke on the phone." "How's my son?" Elena asked. "Is he going to be okay?" Dr. Martinez sat down next to Elena. "Marcus is stable now. The surgery went well. He was shot twice, once in the shoulder and once in the chest. The chest wound was serious, but we were able to repair the damage. He's going to live." Elena felt her legs get weak. She sat back down in the plastic chair and put her head in her hands. Her son was alive. That was all that mattered right now. "When can I see him?" Elena asked. "He's in the recovery room now. You can see him in about an hour. But Mrs. Williams, I need to tell you something else. The bullets caused some damage to his hearing. Marcus could not hear before, but now the situation is more complicated. We won't know the full extent of the damage until he wakes up and we can do more tests." Elena nodded. She understood that her son might be hurt in ways that would take time to discover, but he was alive. Everything else could be dealt with later. "Can you tell me what happened?" Elena asked. "The police officers who shot him, where are they?" Dr. Martinez looked uncomfortable. "I don't know all the details. The police said there was some kind of misunderstanding. They thought Marcus had a weapon, but it was just his house keys. There will be an investigation." Elena felt something cold and hard settle in her chest. A misunderstanding. Her son had been shot twice because of a misunderstanding. Police officers had seen a teenage boy with house keys and decided to shoot him. "I want to see the police report." Elena said, "I want to know exactly what happened." "You'll need to contact the police department for that," Dr. Martinez replied. "Right now, let's focus on Marcus getting better." Elena sat in the waiting room for another hour. She used her phone to call her boss at the CIA and tell him she would not be at work for several days. She called her neighbor Mrs. Johnson to let her know what had happened. She called Marcus's school to tell them he would be absent, but most of the time she just sat and thought. Elena Williams was not just a worried mother. She was a senior intelligence analyst who had spent 15 years learning how systems worked and how to find the truth when people tried to hide it. She knew how to investigate things that other people wanted to keep secret. She knew how to ask the right questions and find the right people to answer them. She knew how government agencies worked and how to make them do what she needed them to do. As Elena sat in that uncomfortable plastic chair, she began to plan. She would find out exactly what had happened to her son. She would learn the names of the officers who shot him. She would read their training records and their histories. She would find out if this was really just a misunderstanding or if there was something more. Elena Williams had access to resources that most mothers did not have. She had security clearances that let her see classified information. She had contacts in law enforcement agencies across the country. She had 15 years of experience in finding the truth. When Dr. Martinez finally came to get her, Elena followed the doctor down a long hallway to the recovery room. Marcus was lying in a hospital bed with tubes and wires connected to his body. His face was pale, but he was breathing on his own. Elena sat in a chair next to his bed and took his hand. It was warm and familiar. This was the same hand she had held when he was learning to walk. The same hand she had bandaged when he fell off his bicycle. The same hand that wrote her letters when he was away at summer camp. "I'm going to find out what happened to you," she whispered to her sleeping son. "And I'm going to make sure it never happens to anyone else." Elena Williams was no longer just a mother sitting in a hospital room. She was a CIA analyst who had work to do. Elena Williams had not slept in 3 days. She stayed at the hospital with Marcus during the day and worked from her home computer at night. Her dining room table was covered with papers, files, and photographs. She had turned her house into a command center. Marcus was getting better. He could sit up in bed now and eat solid food. But the doctors confirmed that the shooting had made his hearing problems worse. Elena tried to stay positive around her son, but inside she was filled with anger that grew stronger every hour. On Tuesday evening, Elena made a phone call that would change everything. She called her boss, Deputy Director Robert Chun, at his home. "Robert, I need a favor," Elena said when he answered. "Elena, how is Marcus doing? I've been worried about both of you. He's getting better, but I need your help with something official. I want to open a federal investigation into the police department that shot my son." There was silence on the phone for a long moment. Elena could hear Robert thinking, "Elena, I understand you're upset. Any parent would be. But you can't use CIA resources for personal matters. You know that? This isn't personal anymore, Robert. I've been doing research for 3 days. This police department has had 4 similar incidents in the past 2 years, all involving people with disabilities, all covered up quietly with small settlements. This is a pattern of civil rights violations." Elena had learned that the police department had paid money to 3 other families to keep them quiet about similar incidents. One involved a blind man who was arrested for not following orders he could not hear. Another involved a man with mental disabilities who was beaten for not understanding police commands. "That's serious if it's true," Robert said. "But even if it is, this should be handled by the FBI, not us. The FBI takes months to start investigations like this. By then, evidence disappears and witnesses forget things. I need to act now while everything is fresh." Elena had a plan. She knew that the CIA had authority to investigate civil rights violations that might affect national security. It was a stretch, but she could make the argument work. "I can frame this as a domestic security issue," Elena continued. "Police departments that violate civil rights create community unrest. Community unrest can be exploited by terrorist groups. We have authority to investigate threats to domestic stability." Robert was quiet again. Elena knew he was considering the legal and political risks of what she was asking. "If I approve this, you cannot be the lead investigator. It would look like revenge, I understand. But I want to be part of the team. I know this case better than anyone. Elena, be very careful. If this goes wrong, it could end both our careers. If I don't do this, it could end my son's life the next time he walks down a street at night." The next morning, Elena drove to the CIA building in Langley, Virginia. She had not been to work since the night Marcus was shot. Her colleagues were surprised to see her, but she did not have time for sympathy or small talk. Elena went straight to the office of Agent Michael Torres. Torres was a former FBI investigator who now worked on domestic security issues for the CIA. He was known for being thorough and fair. "Torres, I need to talk to you about a new assignment," Elena said. "Elena, shouldn't you be with your son right now? My son is the reason I'm here. We're opening an investigation into the Riverside Police Department. Civil rights violations that could affect community stability." Elena spent an hour explaining the situation to Torres. She showed him the documents she had gathered about the other incidents. She explained how police departments that violate civil rights create conditions that terrorist groups can exploit. Torres listened carefully. He had worked similar cases before and knew that Elena was right about the national security angle. "This is legitimate," Torres said finally, "but it's also personal for you. That makes it complicated." "I know. But I also know more about this case than anyone else in the building. You need me on this team." Torres agreed to lead the investigation with Elena as a supporting analyst. They would work with 2 other agents and have access to federal resources that local investigators could never get. Elena spent the rest of the day preparing. She made a list of everyone they needed to interview. She gathered all the police reports and witness statements. She researched the backgrounds of Officers Morrison and Davis. She learned that Morrison had been involved in 2 other incidents during his short career. Both times he had used his weapon when other officers thought it was not necessary. Davis had a clean record, but he had been partnered with Morrison for only 3 weeks. That evening, Elena drove home and called her team together for a meeting. They would begin their investigation the next day. But Elena had one more thing to do first. She drove to the Riverside Police Department. It was a small brick building on the edge of downtown. The parking lot was half empty, and the building looked old and poorly maintained. Elena sat in her car for a few minutes, looking at the building where the officers who shot her son worked every day. Tomorrow, she would return with federal agents and credentials that would shake this quiet police department to its core. The next morning, Elena put on her best black suit and pinned her CIA identification badge to her jacket. She met Torres and the other agents in the parking lot of a restaurant near the police station. "Remember, this is a professional investigation," Torres told the team. "We follow the evidence wherever it leads. We treat everyone with respect, but we get the truth." Elena nodded. She understood that she had to control her emotions and act like the professional she was trained to be. 4 black government cars pulled into the police station parking lot at exactly 10 o'clock in the morning. Elena got out of the second car. Flanked by federal agents carrying briefcases and official paperwork, the desk sergeant looked up in surprise as the group walked through the front door. He had never seen federal agents in his police station before. "I'm Agent Torres, Central Intelligence Agency," Torres announced, showing his credentials. "We're here to see Chief Williams about an official investigation." Elena noticed that she and the police chief had the same last name. It was a coincidence that felt strange and meaningful at the same time. "Chief Williams is in his office," the sergeant said nervously. "I'll get him for you." Police Chief David Williams was a large man with gray hair and tired eyes. He had been running this department for 8 years and had seen his share of problems. But he had never dealt with the CIA. "What can I do for you?" Chief Williams asked when he came to the lobby. "We need to discuss an incident that occurred 3 days ago involving 2 of your officers and a teenage civilian." Torres replied, "Is there somewhere private we can talk?" Elena watched the chief's face carefully. She had been trained to read people's expressions and body language. Chief Williams looked worried but not surprised. He had been expecting this conversation. The chief led them to a conference room with a long table and uncomfortable chairs. Elena sat directly across from him and opened her briefcase. "Chief Williams, I'm going to be direct with you," Torres began. "We're investigating possible civil rights violations by your department. We have reason to believe that the shooting of Marcus Williams is part of a pattern of misconduct." Elena placed a stack of documents on the table. They were the files she had gathered about the other incidents. The chief looked at them but did not pick them up. "I don't know what you think you found," Chief Williams said. "But every incident in this department is investigated thoroughly. We follow proper procedures." "Then you won't mind if we review those investigations," Elena said. These were the first words she had spoken since entering the building. Chief Williams looked at her carefully. "And you are?" "Special Analyst Elena Williams." "Marcus Williams is my son." The room became very quiet. Chief Williams stared at Elena for a long moment, then looked at Torres. "This is highly irregular. She has a personal interest in this case." "Miss Williams is here in a professional capacity," Torres replied. "She has expertise that is valuable to this investigation. Unless you have legal objections, we'll proceed as planned." Elena opened her briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. Inside were detailed timelines, witness statements, and background checks that she had completed using CIA resources. She had spent 3 sleepless nights preparing for this moment. "Chief Williams," Elena said in a calm, professional voice, "we're going to review every report, every witness statement, and every piece of evidence related to the shooting of my son. We're also going to examine 3 similar incidents that occurred in your jurisdiction over the past 2 years. She placed photographs on the table. Pictures of Marcus in his hospital bed. Pictures of the street where he was shot. Pictures of his house keys that the officers had mistaken for a weapon. We're going to interview every officer involved. We're going to review their training records and their personnel files. We're going to examine your department's policies for dealing with people who have disabilities." Elena looked directly into Chief Williams's eyes. And we're going to find out if this was really just a tragic misunderstanding or if there are serious problems with how your officers are trained and supervised. Chief Williams sat back in his chair. He was facing a federal investigation led by a mother who had the resources of the United States intelligence community behind her. Elena and Agent Torres spent 2 weeks investigating the Riverside Police Department. They interviewed witnesses, reviewed video recordings, and examined training materials. What they found was worse than Elena had expected, but also different from what she had feared. The investigation revealed that Officers Morrison and Davis were not bad men who wanted to hurt people. They were poorly trained officers working in a department that had serious problems with how it prepared its people for difficult situations. Elena sat in her temporary office at the police station, reading through Morrison's training records. The young officer had completed basic police academy training, but he had never received specialized education about dealing with people who had disabilities. He had never learned how to recognize when someone might not be able to hear or understand police commands. Agent Torres knocked on her door and came in with a cup of coffee. "I just finished interviewing Mrs. Patterson," he said. "She's the woman who made the original call about Marcus. What did she say?" Elena asked. She saw Marcus walking down the street after dark and thought he looked suspicious because he was walking slowly and stopping frequently. She didn't know that he was reading text messages on his phone. She called the police because she was scared. Elena felt frustrated but not surprised. Fear and misunderstanding had started the chain of events that led to her son being shot. "Torres, I've been reading the department's training manual. There's almost nothing in here about dealing with people who have disabilities. No instructions about how to recognize when someone might not be able to hear you." Torres sat down across from Elena's desk. "It gets worse. I reviewed the training records for the entire department. Only 3 officers have received any education about disability issues, and that was over 5 years ago." Elena had also discovered that the police department had a serious budget problem. They could not afford to send officers to advanced training courses. They could not afford new equipment that might help officers communicate better with people who had hearing problems. But the lack of money was not an excuse for what happened to Marcus. Elena knew that basic respect for human dignity did not cost anything. "What about the other incidents?" Elena asked. "Have you finished reviewing those cases?" "Yes, and the pattern is clear. Every incident involved an officer who panicked because they didn't understand how to communicate with someone who had a disability. Every time, the department paid money to keep the family quiet instead of fixing the real problem." Elena opened another file on her desk. This one contained the personnel records of Chief Williams. She had learned that he was actually a good man who cared about his community. But he was overwhelmed by problems he did not know how to solve. "The chief has been asking for money to improve training for 3 years, Elena said. "The city council keeps saying they don't have the budget for it." "So what do we do?" Torres asked. "We could recommend federal charges against Morrison and Davis. We could demand that the entire department be shut down and rebuilt." Elena had been thinking about this question for days. She had the power to destroy the careers of the officers who shot her son. She had the evidence to prove that the department was incompetent. But she also had a larger responsibility to make sure this never happened to another family. "I want to talk to Morrison and Davis again," Elena said. "But this time, I want to talk to them as a mother, not as a federal investigator." Torres looked surprised. "Elena, that's not how investigations work. You need to maintain professional distance." "I've maintained professional distance for 2 weeks. I've read their files and watched their interviews. Now I need to understand them as human beings." Elena arranged to meet with Officer Morrison the next day. He was a nervous young man who looked like he had not slept well since the shooting. Elena met him in the same conference room where she had confronted Chief Williams 2 weeks earlier. "Officer Morrison, I want you to know that I don't hate you," Elena began. "I'm angry about what happened to my son, but I don't think you're a bad person." Morrison looked surprised. He had been expecting another hostile interrogation. Mrs. Williams. I think about that night every day. I wish I could take it back. I wish I had done things differently. Tell me what you were thinking when you saw my son on the street. Morrison was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was soft and full of regret. I was scared. I had been a cop for only 8 months, and I wanted to prove that I could handle difficult situations. When Marcus didn't respond to our commands, I thought he was being defiant. When I saw something shiny in his hand, I thought it was a weapon. Did you know that Marcus is deaf? No, ma'am. I didn't learn that until after the shooting. If I had known, I would have handled everything differently. Elena studied Morrison's face. She could see that he was telling the truth. He was a young man who had made a terrible mistake because he was not properly prepared for his job. What would have helped you that night? Elena asked. What training or knowledge would have changed what happened? Morrison thought carefully before answering. If I had known how to recognize when someone might have a hearing problem, if I had learned other ways to get someone's attention besides just yelling at them, if I had been taught to take more time to assess a situation before assuming the worst. Elena met with Officer Davis the next day. He was older and more experienced, but he had the same look of regret in his eyes. I should have stopped my partner, Davis told Elena. I should have realized that something wasn't right about the situation. I let my training take over instead of using common sense. What do you mean? We're taught that when someone doesn't follow police orders, they might be dangerous. We're taught to be ready to protect ourselves. But I should have asked more questions. I should have wondered why a teenager walking home from work would want to hurt police officers. Elena spent another week reviewing the evidence and thinking about what she had learned. The investigation had revealed serious problems with the police department. But it had also shown her that the officers who shot Marcus were not evil men. They were poorly trained employees of a system that had failed them and failed her son on Friday afternoon. Elena called a meeting with Chief Williams, Agent Torres, and the mayor of Riverside. She had prepared a detailed report with recommendations for how to prevent similar incidents in the future. Chief Williams, Elena began. Our investigation found significant deficiencies in your department's training and policies. But we also found that you have been requesting resources to address these problems for several years. The chief nodded. Yes, ma'am. I know we need better training, but the city hasn't been able to fund it. Elena turned to Mayor Johnson, a middle-aged woman who looked tired and stressed. Mayor Johnson, this investigation could result in federal charges against your officers and federal oversight of your police department. That would be expensive and embarrassing for your city. Mrs. Williams, we don't have the money for extensive reforms. Our budget is already stretched to the breaking point. Elena smiled for the first time in weeks. Actually, you do have the money. I've identified 3 federal grant programs that would fully fund the training and equipment improvements your department needs. I've also found a nonprofit organization that specializes in disability awareness training for law enforcement. She placed a thick folder on the table. I've written the grant applications for you. I've contacted the organizations that provide training. I've created a timeline for implementing new policies and procedures. Everyone in the room stared at Elena in surprise. Why would you help us? Chief Williams asked. We're the people who hurt your son. Elena thought about Marcus, who was getting stronger every day. She thought about other teenagers who walked home from work at night. She thought about other parents who might get terrible phone calls from hospitals. Because punishment without prevention doesn't help anyone, Elena replied. I want Officers Morrison and Davis to face appropriate consequences for what they did. But more than that, I want to make sure no other family goes through what mine has experienced. Elena opened her briefcase one more time. I'm recommending that Morrison and Davis receive additional training and be placed on probation. I'm recommending that your entire department implement new procedures for interacting with people who have disabilities. And I'm recommending that the federal government monitor your progress for the next 2 years. She looked around the room at the faces of people who had been her adversaries but were now her partners in making change. My son survived being shot twice. He's going to recover and live a normal life, but the next teenager might not be so lucky. We have the opportunity to prevent that tragedy. We have the responsibility to try. Elena Williams had used her skills and resources not for revenge, but for reform. The investigation was complete, but the real work was just beginning. 6 months later, Marcus Williams stood at the podium in the Riverside Community Center. The large room was filled with police officers, city officials, and members of the community. Today was the graduation ceremony for the first group of officers to complete the new Disability Awareness Training Program. Marcus looked different than he had on the night he was shot. He had grown taller and stronger during his recovery. His hearing had improved with the help of new technology, though he still used sign language interpreters for important events like this one. Elena sat in the front row, watching her son with pride and amazement. Marcus had insisted on speaking. At today's ceremony, he wanted to share his story and help others learn from what had happened to him. "My name is Marcus Williams," he began, his voice clear and confident. 6 months ago, I was shot by 2 police officers while walking home from work. Today, I want to talk about how that terrible night led to something positive for our community. Marcus paused and looked around the room. He could see Officers Morrison and Davis sitting in the back row. Both men had completed the new training program and were working to rebuild their careers and their confidence. "I was angry for a long time after the shooting," Marcus continued. "I was angry at the officers who hurt me. I was angry at a system that failed to protect me. But my mother taught me that anger alone doesn't solve problems. Action solves problems." Elena smiled as she listened to her son speak. The past 6 months had been difficult for both of them. Marcus had endured multiple surgeries and months of physical therapy. Elena had worked endless hours implementing the reform program she had designed for the police department, but the hard work was paying off. The Riverside Police Department had received over $200,000 in federal grant money for training and equipment. Every officer in the department had completed 40 hours of disability awareness education. The department had hired a community liaison specialist and installed new communication equipment in every patrol car. The officers who shot me made a mistake, Marcus said. But they made that mistake because they were not given the tools and training they needed to do their job properly. Today, every officer in this room has those tools. Marcus gestured toward a display table near the back of the room. It showed the new equipment that officers now carried, cards with pictures that could be used to communicate with people who could not speak, lights that could be used to get someone's attention without making noise, and reference guides for recognizing and responding to various types of disabilities. More importantly, Marcus continued, every officer here has learned that people with disabilities are not dangerous. We're just different. We need patience and understanding, not fear and violence. Chief Williams stood up and walked to the podium. Over the past 6 months, he had become one of Elena's strongest allies in implementing the reform program. "Ladies and gentlemen," the chief announced, "I want to recognize someone whose work made today possible." Elena Williams turned a personal tragedy into an opportunity for our entire community to become better. The audience applauded as Elena walked to the front of the room. She had not planned to speak today, but she felt moved by the moment and the progress that had been made. 6 months ago, I came to the police station angry and demanding answers, Elena said. I had the power to destroy careers and shut down this department. But I realized that destruction would not bring healing to my family or protection to other families. Elena looked at the faces of the police officers in the audience. Many of them were young, like Officer Morrison had been on the night of the shooting. She hoped that the training they had received would help them make better decisions in difficult situations. The real victory here is not that my son survived his injuries, Elena continued. The real victory is that we have created a system that makes similar tragedies less likely to happen in the future. After the ceremony, Elena and Marcus walked through the community center lobby, talking with police officers and community members. Many people approached Marcus to thank him for his courage in speaking about his experience. Officer Morrison came up to Marcus and Elena near the end of the event. The young officer looked nervous but determined. "Marcus, I want you to know that I think about you every day," Morrison said. "Your story has changed how I approach my job. I'm more careful now. I take time to really understand situations before I react." Marcus looked at the officer for a long moment. Then he reached out and shook Morrison's hand. "Officer Morrison, I forgive you for what happened that night. But more than that, I trust you to make sure it doesn't happen again." Elena watched this exchange with tears in her eyes. 6 months ago, she would never have imagined that her son would be shaking hands with the man who shot him. But healing and growth often happen in ways that people do not expect. A few weeks later, Elena returned to her regular job at the CIA. The Riverside case had been officially closed, and the reform program was being managed by local officials and federal monitors, but Elena's work was not finished. Word about the success of the Riverside program had spread to other communities. Elena received phone calls from police chiefs and mayors in cities across the country. They wanted help implementing similar training programs in their departments. Elena had found a new purpose in her career. She continued her regular intelligence work, but she also became a consultant for law enforcement agencies that wanted to improve their relationships with disabled communities. Marcus returned to school and his job at the bookstore. He was considering studying law enforcement in college, with the goal of becoming a police officer himself someday. He wanted to be part of the solution to the problems that had almost cost him his life. On the first anniversary of the shooting, Marcus and Elena visited the street where the incident had occurred. Someone had placed a small memorial there, a plaque that read, "In memory of misunderstanding, in hope of better communication." Marcus stood on the sidewalk where he had fallen. 6 months earlier, the street looked different now. The broken streetlight had been repaired. The city had installed better lighting and clearer signs throughout the neighborhood. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if things had gone differently that night? Marcus asked his mother. Elena put her arm around her son's shoulders. "I try not to think about that. I prefer to think about all the good things that have come from something so terrible." They walked home together, past the bookstore where Marcus worked, past the community center where he had spoken at the graduation ceremony, past the police station where Elena had demanded answers and found a way to create change. The sun was setting and the streetlights were beginning to turn on. Other teenagers were walking home from their jobs and their activities. But now the police officers who patrolled these streets were better prepared to protect and serve all members of their community. Elena Williams had learned that a mother's love combined with professional skills and determination could move mountains. She had turned her anger into action, her pain into purpose, and her tragedy into triumph. Marcus Williams had learned that healing was more powerful than hatred, and that forgiveness could coexist with demands for justice and change. Together, they had proven that even the worst situations could become opportunities for building a better world. As they reached their house, Marcus turned to his mother one more time. "Thank you," he said simply. "For what?" Elena asked. "For fighting for me, for fighting for everyone, for showing me that we can make things better." Elena hugged her son tightly. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities to create positive change. Tonight, she was simply grateful to be walking home safely with her child, knowing that their community was a little bit better because of the work they had done together. The story that had begun with violence and misunderstanding had ended with healing and hope. It was proof that even in the darkest moments, people could choose to build bridges instead of walls, to create understanding instead of division, and to turn tragedy into triumph through the power of determination, forgiveness, and love.